Now we'll discuss the data transmission methods of VMOM. Let's first open the main module here, where we can see that in the main module, there's a button called Transmission. Inside the transmission button of the main module, we have some sending methods, which are DB file, via API, via OPC-UA, via Modbus, via CSV file storing the database. In the CSV file, and via CSV storing only in one line. For example, for use in Excel or third-party products that read only one cell. Specifically, from the CSV file, let's close. Inside the camera module as we can see here, we also have a transmission button with practically all types of transmission from the main module except for the transmission of the image via DB file. This image transmission. Its main function is to transmit the image to the main module. So that the images can be sent by email or can be analyzed by external AI like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Gemini. We will initially explain about the camera transmission button, remembering that each camera has its own OPC-UA server, its own Modbus server, its own API server, and also its own servers and files that are saved on the hard drive of your computer, like the DB data and the CSV data. Previously. For example, we have here 20 variables that can be selected within each camera. In our case here, we selected the motion variable for region 3A and the motion variable for region 3B. These chosen variables, we'll draw them here. The motion variable for region 3A will be on this port. This value is the result that will be sent in the transmission through the mapping of the variables we selected in the transmission. We can check in the manual. Region 3B2. We will draw on this other port. We'll begin. Simply put, we have two motion variables being placed on these two ports. We'll go back to the transmission, in other words. My transmission variable 1 corresponds to region 3A, and my variable 2 corresponds to my region 3B. We can select all the regions here, including combinations and possible logics to send the data. Activating the type of combination is quite simple. Just select Activate and we start the transmission. To know if the transmission started correctly, we can go to the log and see here that the the DB files transmitting. Remember that for the camera communication. With the main module, which is this. This one here. We need to activate mainly 2 points, which are the DB file. That transmits to the main module. The variable values and also the DB. Image. That transmits the images we'll analyze to the main module. We'll activate both and include the region drawings of the image we're going to send. We start here too, by starting these two automatically. In the main module, when we select Cam1 and the volume of Cam1, we can select here the reading of this value. In our case here, we'll activate and it will be reading every 200 milliseconds the value of the DB file that's being recorded here in the camera module as we see it read. We'll come back here to talk about the other items. We'll also start the OPC UA. We activate here and press the Start button. The OPC UA, how do we know it's started? Through the log of the specific camera. In the log file, we can see it was created. The server was started. Here we have the OPC UA link and the values of each node of the camera has 20 nodes. In this case, it comes with an IP, as we can see. And here, we need to replace it with the current machine's IP. For this link to work correctly, the OPC UA automatically transmits values if it's text. It transmits in text string nodes and if the value is numbers, it transmits in float nodes. Remember that text values are also transmitted, number values too. Here as well. However, in some systems when we use numbers, the best option would be to use the same variable, but as float. It always transmits all data. However, remember that in our camera we configured only variable 1 and variable 2. So, in my transmission, variable 1 and variable 2 will be working. Where's the node ID here? The manual, we have the mapping of these nodes dot. Let's start the Modbus transmission now. When we start the Modbus transmission, we can return here to the log file, and we can see here that it was started. Replace the IP in the link. And here are the ports for each value in its respective address. Remembering that this map is also found in the manual. The same thing happens for the API function. when we start it. We open the log file here and can see that the API was started. And it can be accessed through this link here. Remember that the IP here should always be the IP of the machine in question. We must replace it for it to work correctly. In this case, the hostname and the IP of the machine, which is our server. Here I have the CSV data file. I started its publication, and I also started the publication of our single-line CSV file. Remember that all transmission methods have an interface. Intervals. This is the update interval. For each of these tools, we advise keeping the minimum interval already configured. However, it can be reduced or increased. However, we must consider that the shorter the time, the higher the processing, more HD use, etc. So we have to evaluate the best update time for each of these tools. Also remember that the ports are fully configurable. As we can see here, we have fields for OPC UA, Modbus, and API that allow us to change the ports for each of these servers here. We will understand where the DB files are and DB image and CSV files of the transmission method. When we enter the camera module, we go to Help. It's not at this point, it's in the Help menu of the main menu. Let's return to the main menu Help and open the directory. This here is the vmem directory on your HD where it was installed. Files for each camera are in their respective folders, Cam1. Where here I have the DB file of the inserted values. Frames DB file. The data CSV file. Let's enter it here and check how it is. Where it records the date and the last variations, creating a database. If there was a variation or not, if there is no variation, it doesn't record. And here I have the CSV file that is updated with only one line. This line here gets replaced. Let's go back. To the transmission module. The identification of each one and the location is also in the manual when we enter the main module. We also have the main module transmission of the main module. Let me close this camera module. We'll work only with the main module now. The only transmission we don't have, as mentioned earlier, is the image DB. But we have all the others, meaning we can have each camera have its own servers and the main module also have its own servers. The only difference is that in the main module, we have up to 60 outputs. It's interesting to use mainly the main module to reduce the software processing and use the modules of the transmission cameras when it's really necessary or when a higher reading speed is needed. The DB and CSV files of the main module are also found in the root folder, in this case, in the root folder of the program. The generated CSV file and the DB file. Generated. We'll return here to the transmission module from the main menu. This DB file is a DB file that can be configured for programs in Python to read it, thus transmitting data to a Python program, for example, like A. Your program in another language can also read the API. So these are methods of external communication. In this way, we conclude our explanation regarding communication and the transmission method of the camera module and the module main.